What's up, y'all? I know I just released a video previously, but I really had to talk about this, and some people are gonna be excited, but for me, I'm not. Let me tell you why. I just want to ask a question: what the fuck is wrong with Samsung? Excuse my language, but what's wrong with Samsung? They've released a new pair of phones, and they have four cameras on them. So as you can see from here, this for a couple of months now, we've been getting leaks about a crazy new phone by Samsung, one equipped with four cameras on the back. The device in question is this year's iteration of the Galaxy A9 line, an upper mid-range class device which carries some of the bling of the S family, but also comes with a few traits of its own. Take a closer look. So let me skip the design aspect and let's go to the hardware. This has the Snapdragon 660 at 2.2 gigahertz, 6 or 8 gigs of RAM depending on which one you get, and it has 128 gigabytes of storage, 512. The battery is 3800, and yeah, you can see the camera specs right over here. Look, man, this is ridiculous. You know why it's ridiculous? Although a lot of people are going to say, well, it doesn't have a Snapdragon 845. We all know, anybody who knows about the Snapdragon 600 series knows that it gives way better battery life and gives good enough performance. My whole thing is like, there's a trend with Samsung. I had the Note 4 a couple years back. That was in 2015 that I had my Note 4. And they released the J series phone. Now, the J series phone was nowhere near as powerful as the Note 4, but it had newer software and better, like more well tuned not specifications, features. My question is like, Samsung, why do they keep releasing these phones instead of like just releasing something solid? Anytime there's something in the market that they realize that, whoa, wow, we messed up over here, they start releasing a whole bunch of new phones. So this has four cameras, it has a good amount of RAM, and it has what's it called, 128 gigs internal storage. Hopefully it gets more than a year of worth of updates, because like I feel like a lot of times Samsung will release some crazy good phones and then like it only gets a year's worth of updates. Like, what the hell? The whole update thing already, that's my biggest problem with Samsung already. And it's not the frequency of the updates, but it's the longevity of the updates. Whereas like an Apple device like the 5S is still getting software updates well into 2018 and probably even into 2019. Samsung devices around the same releases around the same year. The Galaxy S4 stopped receiving updates years ago. So at the end of the day, how do you justify competing with Apple at certain price points and comparing yourself to the company when you don't even your devices are not even supported for as long? That is ludicrous. And then on top of this, you release this phone. The only thing is, it's gonna have a less powerful processor. But depending on what kind of person you are, I would even in some cases prefer a Snapdragon 660. Why? Because it's gonna give you better battery life. And with that amount of RAM, lag is not really something you probably have to worry about. You understand? Lag. Let me explain one thing, because like a lot of people don't really know what causes lag. Lag is when you input a command and it takes a couple of seconds or it takes a while for it to output the data that you require in a timely fashion, which is different than stuttering, which deals with skipped frames, which is usually a GPU problem. RAM, like what happens is if you have too many things stored in RAM at this particular time, it'll take a second because it has the software has to remove certain things from RAM to compensate for the new command, and then Another thing that affects speed is the read write speeds of the internal storage. You understand what I'm saying? So if you have fast internal storage and you have enough RAM, and you also have a good display, which is able to input the data quick enough, you usually get a good experience. You know what I'm saying? So like the Snapdragon 660 is powerful enough its processor is powerful enough for most of the applications you'd use. It's the GPU which might not be as powerful for a lot of intensive games, but you're not. I don't think you want to buy this phone for gaming. That's not the main feature. So what I feel is like Samsung releasing these kind of devices sporadically is in a lot of ways a spit in the face to people who buy devices. You buy a device in June and then by September it's outdated because there's another one with better features. And then uh, in a couple of months the S10 is gonna come out. So a lot of us who bought the Note devices as every year, because when you think about it, Samsung doesn't think about the devices the same way we do. The device should be for the next year, prepared for the next year. That means its features and specs should be geared towards longevity in the next year because that's when the next device comes. And within that same timeline, the next S device is going to come around. So it made a bit more sense when, let's say, the S3 comes out, the Note 3 came out in the same year as the S4. The S4 had the Snapdragon 600, 2 gigs of RAM, 1080p, and I think 16 gigs in internal storage. The Note 3 came out 32 gigs internal storage, 3 gigs of RAM, 1080p display, 3000 milliamp hour battery or 3200, and a Snapdragon 800, which was way more powerful than the 600. The next year, the S5 comes out with the Snapdragon 801, 2 gigs of RAM, and 16 gigs internal storage. So you could see like the Note 3 had a step up over the Note 5, the S5. Later that year of the S5 was the Note 4, which had a Snapdragon 805. 3 gigs of RAM, 3 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs internal storage. Basically the same camera, 16 megapixels if I'm right, and a 2 point something in the front, or is it 5? So it was a little bit of an update grade over the Note 3, but it had a 2K display which offset that, and it was like way more substantial than the S5. So you could feel like you're really buying into something nice. But the next year is when they started fucking up and then releasing a whole bunch of phones with newer software, and the Note 4 was barely updated, and when the updates came, it wasn't substantial enough. The experience didn't change. The user experience didn't change. They just changed the icons. And then that's it. So then that year, the next year was the S6, 3 gigs of RAM, way more powerful processor. That was Exynos 7420. 2K display. It's just that I didn't have an external removable battery and expandable storage. So later that year, that's when they started to fuck shit with the Note 5, and then the Note 5 would have this from that year on. Then the Notes would have basically the same specs as the S series, but even at least the Note 5 had 4 gigs of RAM. That's funny that the Note 5 had 4 gigs of RAM, and the Pixel has 4 gigs of RAM. That's funny, in a way. But later on, the Note 7 came around. We already know how that turned out. And now Samsung is still has a trend of not. I wish they would just follow. They would actually follow some of the things that Apple gets right. Release at most 4 phones during the year. You know, one for One for your mid range. I mean, your mid range or low end, something nice and cheap. Release another one for your or two for your S line, and then release your Note for the top end, and make sure that each of them are different. Stop with the S Plus being as almost as good or comparable to the Note. It just makes you, it makes you buy the phone from them and feel like you got cheated. The Note 8 had a smaller battery than the S8 Plus had, which was ridiculous, and it had the same processor, same RAM. It's the S Pen that was different, and a couple software tweaks. This year, the gap is a bit more substantial, but the RAM and the processor is still similar, unless you got like the 512 version. And I know it's like a lot of people don't really get what I mean, but like at the end of the day, they need to differentiate the different devices that come out. If it's coming out later in the year, prove why it's worth coming out later in the year and forking over more money. And then don't release another device afterwards that comes and then kind of basically makes you rethink your strategy. The only thing is that the support for this particular device that made this whole rant start is going to be in question. We don't know if it'll get 2 years or a year of updates, and that's kind of sad given that that's some pretty impressive hardware, and it's got 4 cameras, an ultra wide, a telephoto, a main camera, and a depth camera for live focus, which is ridiculous. Also, Samsung should try and refine the software behind their processing, because the image processing is not that great compared to the the iPhone XS Max and XS. I'm sorry, those names are ridiculous. And then the pixels. I have the Pixel camera on my phone, and I quite prefer the image processing because the highlights are usually blown out on the Note 9. The highlights are just a little bit too emphasized for my taste, and I'm not gonna go into pro mode every time I want to take a picture. So that being said, this is another rant and another incoherent rant from your boy. And if you like this video, please hit me with that thumbs up. If you want to see more content like this and listen to my annoying voice more, I would love it if you could subscribe. Thank you very much for tolerating this rant. Peace out.